many places, we're also seeing that it doesn't really provide an answer to many of the challenges. We need a much richer conception of social progress, one which isn't merely the outcome of the smallest possible denominator of different worldviews. We need a definition that finds the agreement of widening circles of populations, which is jointly shaped by them, one where individuals are re-examining their own assumptions about what progress entails, and are then contributing with their respective insights, one where they're learning from each other and really with each other. So this requires us to find ways to allow every nation, culture, form, or belief to tap into their moral and intellectual capabilities in order to lay the foundations of a global society. Now, religion and faith are a significant part of human consciousness and identity. And this meeting, therefore, will look in particular at why we should and how we can tap into religious insights. And however great that challenge, it also seems true that more than ever before, we have an unprecedented opportunity to ensure that everyone, whatever their background, can participate in the writing of a joint future. So I'm really looking forward to this and to benefit from the participation of all those that are present today. Thank you for joining.
Rachel, thank you. And thank you for being proactive with your partners to approach us for this conversation. As you know, we think it's a really important conversation to be having for all the reasons I mentioned in the introduction, but there are some absolutely massive challenges on the horizon. We're coming through one and still through one in terms of the COVID crisis, but given the fast and unpredictable nature of the challenges on the horizon, which are to do with climate change, technology, the issue of ethics, religion, faith become even more pronounced. And it'll be interesting to see what people in the audience who are listening and watching, I'd be really welcome your views on this, is that, we've got generations of people who now only know what it is to communicate with an iPad and a smartphone. And that's going to be increasingly the case. But yet we witness one of the biggest global turnouts of teenagers in relation to the Greta effect, as people call it, for example. So we have some faith in what younger generations perhaps are better at connecting to their value system than the previous ones, to a certain extent. Yet, we have a very, very volatile world that sometimes is separated by religious faiths and tenets. So I'm now going to invite, thank you very much for that, and we're looking forward to the discussion with you. I'm now going to invite Grace Davey, who's at the University of Exeter, and Nancy Ammerman, who's from Boston University, for both of you to say a little bit about your work on the International Panel on Social Progress. But, what is it? And, what's the place of religion in it? Difficult, big questions. Some of it's touched upon on the video, but I hand over first to Grace. Grace, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon. You've already heard this phrase, International Panel on Social Progress. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. This is a consortium that came into existence precisely to assess and synthesize the state-of-the-art knowledge that bears on social progress across a wide range of economic, political, and cultural questions. Our goal in those meetings, and then our report, was to provide the target audience, that is, individuals, movements, organizations, politicians, decision makers, practitioners, with the best expertise that social science can offer. The report, a 3-volume report, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2018. Now, the best way to think of the International Panel on Social Progress is to recall, which you probably already know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, I think of IPSP as a cousin of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and note that I've chosen the word cousin. It's not quite a sibling. It has very similar ways of working. In other words, it draws on wide academic expertise across many disciplines, trying to place the findings of our work into the public domain in a form where the layperson or the specialist in any particular field can easily access and understand it. But unlike the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there was no political control in the International Panel on Social Progress. For which reason, thankfully, we were not obliged to achieve unanimity, which the climate people are. You know, they have these all-night sessions before they agree their final statements. We didn't have to do that. So there's a degree of flexibility about what we could say. And Nancy, who will speak in just a moment, and I were charged with the chapter, a long chapter, on the place of religion in this enterprise. And Nancy will tell you a little bit now on our challenge, because it was not so easy as you might think. Nancy, can you carry on?
Sure. As we discovered the first time this large group of people gathered together, we discovered that many of our colleagues were really quite surprised that we were there. They were surprised that there was going to be a chapter on religion in an effort on social progress. Many of them operated as if they assumed religion was going to disappear, or that if it was still around, it was probably more of a problem than a contributor to social progress. One of the other things that I think we discovered along the way is just how important that we knew, and that they discovered how important it was to include religion, because the vast majority of the world's population identifies with a religious tradition, and therefore if we ignore that aspect of society, we're going to end up with proposals for social progress that really get us nowhere.
Great, thank you. Grace, you coming back?
I could come back, yes. How did we counter these challenges and these somewhat inaccurate perceptions of religion? Our first task was to really get the best possible definition of religion that we could. And this is what we emerged from our work, that religion is a lived, situated, and constantly changing reality, and has as much to do with navigating everyday life as it does with the supernatural. In other words, we were looking at how people live their lives and the place of religion in this. And as we unfold, talking about health and development, and when James begins to talk to you about interfaith dialogue, it's really the lived realities that we are after, not necessarily belief systems or specified practices. And I think the rest of how we approach religion will come out bit by bit in the various sections that follow. And I mean, I'm ready now to carry on and talk about the notion of social progress as we saw this, but maybe people want to come back to us at this stage before we pitch into that.
No, indeed, thank you. And just have clarification, how many institutions or how many countries were represented in your mass coming together?
I couldn't give you a precise figure. It was global.
Okay.
But we had, when we had to build our teams, we had 12 in our chapter team, which was about average. And we were asked very strongly to include people from neither Europe nor North America.
Great, okay.
And we did, and it's delightful that this afternoon, Samia is with us, who comes from Bangladesh. I'm really, really pleased that she can join us today and was part of the panel. Now, what we discovered is that it's not so easy from scholars from the developing world to join these panels because their connectivity is sometimes compromised. And the scholars who are really top class in that field are often overworked. And what we ended up with was a very, very fine team, many of whom were from the developing world, but were now working in either the US or in Europe. But what we aimed for in our chapter was a good representation of global regions, a good representation of social scientific disciplines. So we had politicians, and sociologists, anthropologists, etc., and a good representation of top class knowledge of the world faiths.
Okay, all right. Let me bring our audience in. Thank you very much for that. And ask for any reactions to what you've heard. Those of you who are here for out of just curiosity, those of you who actually are, people who are really engaged in this topic or studying it, or just simply have an interest. Any questions from any of you would be really very welcome. Your reaction to what you've heard so far, or your view on this particular topic. So who'd like to have a go? You have to raise your virtual hand, don't forget. And don't be shy, you're here. So make the most of it. Who's coming? Is anyone coming here? Do we have somebody? We have Heidi. Heidi, where are you?
Yeah, hello, that's me.
Please,
Thank you.
will you say who you are and where you're from? That would be lovely to know.
That's right. So I'm Heidi Jokinen. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in theology in Finland. So up north. Thank you very much, Nancy and Grace, for your very thought-provoking start. And very much what Nancy was saying, I can really relate to people being shocked by suddenly introducing religion in any of such global discussions. However, then I'm wondering, because then Grace was giving a definition of religion, saying that it's mainly lived realities rather than only something supernatural. Now I'm getting hesitant. Was this mainly because you didn't really want to scare off the other people, or is it because that's getting to be a new modern way of actually describing religion in the 21st century?
Interesting question. Heidi, thank you so much for that. Before you come back, Grace and Nancy, 1 second, I'd like to go back to the audience and see if I have any further reactions from our folk. We have a lot of young people. Well, they look young to me. There's like an old one like me. And I can't see the screen at the moment, but some of you I can see are looking on, interestingly. I really welcome a view on the topic from one of you who are in the audience who are sitting there looking on and smiling. Anyone? Any takers? No?
Can I just respond to to Heidi's question?
Who's this?
That's Nancy.
This is Nancy.
Ah, Nancy, okay.
Heidi, it wasn't that we were afraid of theology, but rather those of us who are social scientists studying religion have been really drawn to the reality as we look at what we're studying, that ordinary people don't necessarily live by the catechism. They are really living out a variety of kinds of beliefs and practices that don't necessarily follow neatly. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that in just a moment.
Okay, all right. Benjamin Shaw, you're from the University Center on Modernity and Transition. Welcome.
Thank you. I read through the chapter on religion and progress, and it was a very wonderful piece of work. So thank you all very much for putting that together. And I think one interesting thing that I noticed is just how, for those who are in the field a bit, the statement that religion isn't going away and that can contribute to social progress in meaningful ways is just sort of the beginning point for inquiry, but still so much within the kind of contemporary thought, the point has to be made again and again and again. And so to simply make that point has such value. The one question though that I was still sort of left with, and the video actually sort of sharpened this for me, is that, when we say, well, it's not just material progress that counts as social progress. And then we say, well, beyond the material progress, you could say, well, there might be some kind of spiritual progress. But then we tend to define that spiritual progress in terms of categories that sort of are totally available within a secular framework, such as freedom or equality or tolerance, which are very valuable, obviously. But one could also wonder, are there further dimensions of this kind of, you know, spiritual progress, non-material progress that a religious framework particularly helps to clarify and to bring into kind of relief? And, you know, might there be something more one could say about that particular question?
What's your view?
I mean, I think personally that's, you know, if there is more to reality than just the material world, then, you know, as valuable as questions such as freedom and tolerance are, we would actually have to have some knowledge about this spiritual reality, and to generate more knowledge about that reality and to translate it into new forms of action would be an essential part of social progress. So some of the virtues and values that religious systems have long pursued, you know, such as perfection, such as hope, such as, you know, kind of transcendence, self-sacrifice, selfless service, that these would have to be part somehow of our vision of social progress. And that could help take us beyond kind of a purely secular framework, but in ways that a variety of traditions could really reach common consensus about. So without having thought too much about it, those would be some
That's okay.
intuitions I would have.
Thank you. So before I bring Nancy and Grace in, we have Fred. Fred, where are you? Fred wanted to come in. Can you hear me, Fred? You there? Have I lost you? Ah. Is that you, Fred? We can't hear you.
No.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Okay.
Say who you are and where you are.
Yes, I'm Fred Petrossian. I'm Brussels-based journalist and researcher. I'm Armenian Iranian. Then the question that I will ask comes from a kind of third world background that I have. I mean, at the beginning, it was great that you talked about different people, talked about that we shouldn't take Western way of doing things as blueprint. And different societies can develop their own norms. I think it's a very dangerous concept and approach, because when you live in societies like Iran, they use the same discourse to violate human rights, and many people in the West, they overlook that, say it's their own societies and they do their own progress. Don't you think that instead of saying that Western way of doing things is not a blueprint, that other societies to do that, which is completely right, to say that Universal Human Rights Declaration of United Nations is a blueprint for the social progress and the way we do it, either in the Western world or the third world countries?
And you believe it is that the UN, United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is a fitting declaration that
I think it's the best thing that we have.
It doesn't look at north and south, doesn't look at black or white or culture. It's sufficiently neutral for you.
Yeah, I think it's the best thing that we have now.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Let me see if there's anybody else who'd like to come in from our gallery. Are any of you young people that I keep on referring to that I can see smiley faces? Please, come on. There you go. Can I see Noura? You're not going to come in? Okay, don't worry. I won't pick on people like that I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but please do engage. It'd be great to have your voice in this conversation. So let's go back to you, Grace, and Nancy, to respond to some of the questions you've heard from our participants.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do this by taking you on a little bit into how we really did understand social progress when we got going. What we were really trying to say is that we have to escape from Enlightenment assumptions, which are Western, that progress is somehow built into history, that there's an inevitability about progress. We need to escape from the fact that it is simply something about economic betterment, though there is nothing wrong with economic betterment. but we need to go beyond that. Like Ben said, we need to bring into the picture various aspects of social as well as economic progress, and indeed spiritual. And a very good place to think about this is to understand that people of faith and faiths of their nature give us places to think about progress, to think about the human condition, and to think about what we really do want. When we were working together at the big gatherings of the international panel, we were enjoying to think, to ask ourselves, how do we imagine progress? And an answer comes out of the world faiths. Every single one of them imagines something better. And while I take the point that there are universal standards which probably have come from the West, like the human rights discourse, just remember that there's a huge equivocation in the human rights discourse about freedom of religion. There are some contributors to that debate who necessarily, or see religion as necessarily inimical to social progress, that it is the antithesis of social progress.
I.e. that it stops social progress, to put it in simple terms.
Well, one of the places we looked at in the report was the tensions between conservative forms of religion, Iran included, and say, developing, evolving norms about gender and sexuality, and how are we to deal with that? Mm-hmm. But what I want to say, I want to finish this sentence, it's important. There's another view that sees freedom of religion and belief as the core of human rights. If you do not have freedom of religion and belief, you do not live in a democracy. If you cannot be seriously religious in any society, that society is not a democracy. Now, that's not arguing in any way for a theocracy. That is entirely out of the question, as is an entirely secular society such as North Korea or China, as is emerging now. But finding the place for seriously held religion is a real challenge to democracy, and if you cannot achieve it, your democracy is deficient. Now, in the report, one very interesting notion was not so much putting a lot of detail in what social progress is going to look like in any particular society, but that the notion of a compass was deployed as a metaphor, in the sense that it sets the line of travel, and that you know where you're going. Now, where you start and where you end is going to be very different in different societies. That is evident. But you do need to have a kind of a goal in front of you, that you're working towards something. But it is this map, if you like, if you're going on with your compass analogy, this question is complex, the map is complex, and the destination is elusive. It's not, we know exactly where we're going and we can get there tomorrow. It's just not like that. And what I'm going back to this point, we're going to argue about that this afternoon, I can see this. What is considered progress in one situation may be differently assessed in another. Now, I, in the West, take for granted, in the UK, I don't take much for granted in the UK now, but the availability of clean water is a good example. That is not so in many parts of the world. And to have clean water supply freely available to everyone is, I think, a sign of progress. But I think if Nancy picks up this thread, because we were talking about it the other day, she will show you how unwise it is for any of us to take any of this for granted. It's continuing work, whether we're in the West, whether in the developing world, we are all working at it. And if you become complacent, you will lose things of value. Nancy, can you give an example? Because
one thing I'd like you to think about, Grace, is that there is that, and so what? If it's that highly undefinable, that we have to caveat it in this way, in situation, we have to make it, there are situational analysis, etc. what's the point in terms of policymakers? Are they going to listen? And what is there a role for policymakers in this debate? But you can think about that whilst Nancy comes back on the point you were making.
Yeah, I think I want to ask you to kind of hold that large question about the so what for the end of our discussions this afternoon. I think we're going to be addressing that in various ways over the course of the afternoon. But just to pick up on Grace's point about how we think about social progress, it is in fact an ongoing struggle. As I was reminding her, Flint, Michigan in the US and its contaminated water supply, reminds us that even though we live in a so-called developed country, we can't take something like clean water for granted. So where we are in that struggle for something better, progress, clean water, is going to be very different and be an ongoing thing. And one of the things that I also want to remind us is that sometimes when we think about progress, we think about something that's kind of a slow, steady movement in a direction. But this current moment certainly reminds us that progress often happens out of crisis. And one of the things that we're seeing in the US, for instance, is that the sight of George Floyd being lynched by a white police officer on a Minnesota street has become one of those crisis moments. And we have seen not only the massive street protests, but also evidence that there is real change going on in how people are thinking about these things. Just 5 years ago, fewer than half of Americans would say that an unarmed black man being killed by a white police officer was a sign of a systemic problem. Now, over 70% of Americans say that. And that change, that shift is happening across political and demographic lines. Now, what that means is also that new forms of response and new forms of cooperation and striving toward progress are beginning to emerge. And we're seeing the kinds of partnerships between secular and religious leaders that we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Now, in the US, religion is, remains a pervasive presence that can't be ignored. But what I want to come back to reminding you is that 80% of the world's population identifies with a religious tradition. So when we say we need to pay attention and think about how we can form these partnerships, that's really true around the world. And I also want to come back to what we said earlier about how we're thinking about what it is that religion is, that we're paying attention to. It is that lived everyday reality that people are engaged in, the here and now as much as the hereafter. And learning about that isn't necessarily just learning the sort of, 5 key beliefs of each of the world's religions.
Indeed.
It is learning about what people are actually doing, how they're actually living their lives. And that simply requires that we learn how to pay attention and listen.
Sure. And I think that one of the questions, and we will come back to it, and Nancy, that was really very helpful. I really welcomed the point you made that it was ever thus in history that it's crisis or the death of someone significant or a moment of, let's say, mass starvation or striking that creates the tipping point for change. And we see those things accelerate in a way that we hadn't seen move for at least 20 years. Women can refer to that in terms of the women's movement. The lesbian gay community can refer to it. The black and the black and ethnic minority communities can refer to it in terms of moments. And this one that we're living through at the moment, at this very moment in time, is a clear example of that. But I suppose it depends, and I liked what you said also, both of you, Nancy and Grace, about what social progress means to you. Because I wonder, so I want to see if this is going to work, okay? So I need you, so those of you who are silent can use your virtual hand, okay? So I just want to test just test. So we have one proposition. So what I'd like you to do is, in answer to this question, all you have to do, so you can remain, you know, not totally anonymous, but because everyone can see you, but all you have to do, you don't have to speak. You just have to use your virtual hand. And if you think that, as Grace has said, that free water available everywhere is a sign of social progress. So just put your virtual hand on for me if you think that's the case. You know where your virtual hand is? All of you? Am I seeing them? Yeah? Is that most people? Great. Can I ask those of you whether you think gender equality is an absolute in social progress? Again, use your virtual hand. Or your hand. That's great. All right. Whether you think, do you believe or believe that a fair wage, a fair minimum wage for everyone is social progress? Again, use your hand, your virtual hand, and let us know. If your virtual hand's not working, just put it up. That's great, I can see it. So a fair minimum wage across the world. Okay, all right. In terms of, let's say, climate change, do you feel that a sign of social progress is that you have some guarantee from government that they act in saving the planet? Do you feel that there should be a public guarantee from government that acts on your behalf to protect the planet? Is that social progress for you? Do you want a public guarantee from government that says they will act to save the planet? Raise your hands, your virtual hands. Is that a sign of social progress? Okay. Thank you for playing with me. Because if you're not going to speak, I had to find ways of engaging you in different ways. But I think that's very interesting because also it gives us a sense of the very situational, contextual, demographic, gendered, and some common, some not, responses to what we regard to be social progress. And I think one of the questions that we'll return to in this discussion is that, and we haven't touched upon it, is that how does the institution of religion, so I'm not talking about Christianity, I'm talking or Islam or Hinduism or a range of Buddhism, etc. I'm talking about the institution of religion is able to reflect you in all your various forms. And the other flip side, I suppose, is that all of us have witnessed in the past 20 years the most significant cases of abuse, corruption, very, very, very male approaches, and the inability of various communities to feel themselves reflected in religion. And what does that do to this debate about social progress? So as we move forward, Ben, do you want to come in and say a few words just by way of summary, or shall I move on?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind. I think there's a theme that seems to have popped up a few times, which is kind of this, maybe not a tension, but this balance between something like the focus on the minimum requirements of social progress, many of which have been articulated very admirably in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or some of these basic social goods. And then these more kind of lofty aspirations about the kind of moral and spiritual achievements of human beings individually and collectively. And it seems that one of the intuitions that many in sort of the West have had is that if we could just focus on the minimum, wouldn't that be enough? Why do we have to ask these much larger, more lofty questions about kind of moral and spiritual achievements? But I think a point that emerged, and I think that Grace mentioned, is that there's something essential about these broader, more kind of aspirational, robust visions of what the world could be, of what humans could be, how we could live, that is nourished by religion and religious communities, that if we lose that space of imagination and the cultivation of hope, and actually the sort of the reflection on those real forces that we might tap into to realize even these more minimal forms of social progress, we might actually lose the conviction and the desire and the resolve to realize some of these minimum goods. So I think this point about there's something about the pursuit of a higher good that might actually be essential for us to achieve these very basic minimum things like water or minimum wage or quality. And that if we push those higher aspirations aside, I think one of the things we're seeing in the world today is that we might actually be losing our commitment to these very sort of minimum essential goods that we're pursuing, and somehow like the discourse on.
There's something about not adopting a cynical model, one might say. Actually, continue to reach for the stars, but otherwise you'll lose the ground beneath your feet if you like. So. That terra firma will disappear of the minimum. Thank you very much. I have a couple of people who want to come in. Anas, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I can't see you though. 1 second. Let me see if I can find a way of seeing you.
You can't see me. Just have my photo.
Okay.
So I want to thank everyone here. I have a question that I'm interested in. First,
introduce yourself, Anas, so that we know.
My name is Salalka, and I am a human rights advisor working with the Human Rights Foundation, a grant-making foundation. I know there's a huge misunderstanding of religious institutions and their contributions, especially to humanitarian aid, for instance. Around 30% of humanitarian aid is being provided from, financial aid coming from religious institutions. But
Oh, we've lost you. Sorry, you're muted. Anas?
Can I?
Now you can, Anas. There you go.
Okay. How religion can contribute to our social progress if it does not support basic human rights, like especially in countries where we don't look like to the stars, or we're not raising the bar for our definition of social progress, just basic LGBT rights, coexistence reality, and religion only has made a social progress for the majority, not the minority. I mean, I just would love one of our your esteemed guests to answer this question if they can in a realistic, actionable, doable way. How religion can guarantee human respect and dignity for everyone, not in intellectual way only. Thank you so much.
And Anas, before you go, whereabouts are you based?
I'm based in Brussels, Belgium.
You're in Brussels, Belgium. Okay, great. Thank you for that question. It was very much appreciated. We have Noura. Where are you, Noura?
I'm here. Hello, thank you. So I'm Noura, and I'm based in Brussels.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very fascinating conversation that we're having, and I find it very interesting that most of the comments that were made are very focused on institutionalized religion, or we look at religious institutions, whereas when I think about religion and the role of religion in society, I also think about what kind of an effect religion has on the individual and what kind of motivation it gives an individual to be of service to their communities, to society, to work towards progress. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that in the mix, I guess.
No, thank you. And in terms of, there's questions about its relevance. You're a young person, and what's your view on the kinds of things, the basics that you'd want, or rather what you'd like to see more aspiration on this debate?
Well, I think, that's an interesting question.
I know it's hard, right?
Well, no, I mean, what strikes me also, for instance, the question that you asked about, the last question that you asked in the virtual hand debate.
It's about the climate change being a guarantor, action from government being a guarantor, yeah.
Exactly. I was thinking then, for me, a sign of social progress is actually that the individual takes the responsibility to actually act in their own way and not wait for the government to do it for them, for instance. And religion can be a huge contributing factor in me being motivated to do that, because it shapes my worldview.
Mhm.
I don't know, for instance, I see, it's God's creation, I need to take care of it. Seeing other human beings as having human dignity because they have a soul, they're a part of creation.
Uh-huh.
So I feel the responsibility to take care of that and to not just think about myself, but about the social progress as a whole.
Yeah.
And to see myself as a protagonist in contributing to this progress.
Thank you. Sorry for pressing you. I finally got you to speak. So I'm really pleased about that. Excellent. No, but really, you make some really important points, Noura. And that thing about agency is obviously key and what motivates that self-agency. But it could also be interpreted as a political choice. So where your individual action could also lead to voting people that you think are going to make a difference to your life or not, which is also an element of individual action, one might say. But thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. Salim, where are you? We're just looking for Salim. Are you still there? Sorry, Noura, we still have you on the screen there. Okay, what about Venu? Venu, can you hear me? So we've got a slight technical hitch here. Venu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Ah, where are you?
Hang on. I'm here, sitting with my daughter.
Ah, lovely. Hello, welcome to this discussion. Please do introduce yourself and where are you? Where are you currently?
We are both from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And obviously we're not part of the European Union. We're just listening and enjoying the conversation.
Are you in Brussels at the moment?
No, I'm not. We are in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Are in Kuala Lumpur. Well, welcome. Gosh, what global reach. Great. So tell me, what's your question or comment to this discussion?
I don't have any. I think the hand was put up for your questions earlier.
So
currently we're listening, and as far as religion is concerned, I suppose it depends on where you come from and the culture that you belong as well.
Mm-hmm.
Some culture, for example, in Malaysia, is a multicultural, multiracial society, and it's viewed, but it's different culture and different religion view social action and how individuals can participate in social action and serving the community. But there's also an element of the culture whereby this part of the world, there's also a culture of supporting each other, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But it's becoming very clear, I think in everywhere around the world, we've also realized that many religious bodies in Malaysia during the pandemic rose to the occasion. They supported the community. And as far as social progress is concerned, because of that, there's becoming a greater awareness of the role of religion in supporting social projects, including the ones that appears to be marginalized. I think this is one positive thing that we saw over the last 3-4 months. So I think you caught me off guard, and unfortunately.
No, I'm glad I did, because you made a very thoughtful contribution. It's good, but it's also, it's important that you're here. Please, I want to just, acknowledge that, because this is a global conversation, and it is interesting how. That's why I was saying in my introductory remarks that somehow the impact of the virus has made our world feel so much smaller, and our ability to connect with each other on a human level, whether that was from our streets looking out to the windows, that sort of happened everywhere in the world in various ways. But also we had a sense of a sentiment or a feeling that made us become much more connected to each other, regardless of where we were or our religion, our color, our background. So there was a moment, but one of my concerns is that I hope that moment is not easily forgotten. When I'm in Brussels, and it was great that people had a sense of commonality, but now when you look out on the streets, it's full of congestion. It's almost as if people have just forgotten that we've come out of a crisis. But thank you for your comment, Venu. I have Max. Max?
Hi there. Max from the London School of Economics. I just wanted to make a comment on what appears to be sort of one of the big questions emerging in this conversation, which is sort of how you have a conception of progress, which on the one hand kind of goes beyond a certain kind of enlightened Western conception of progress, also doesn't collapse into kind of, you know, cultural relativism where you just say, well, different people are just different or whatever, because I guess, you know, the global problems that we're talking about, climate change, disease management, international security, these are global problems. So it requires the kind of progressive clarification of some kind of, you know, shared conception of progress. And it just seems from conversation, religion can make a kind of an interesting contribution here. Because religions, on one hand, they do go beyond a kind of Enlightenment secular definition of progress and introduce ideas of, you know, the pursuit of higher perfections, the, you know, self-sacrifice and so on. But at the same time, they're very global, right? They think in universal terms. Religious communities often cross national boundaries and so on. But if religion is going to do this, I think, you know, one thing when we were talking about the IPSP its way of looking at religion, I thought was very interesting, because it sort of points us beyond thinking about religion as a kind of series of rituals or a kind of series of very particular theological claims. Because as I understand it, if religion is going to contribute productively to this conversation, well, we have to sort of think of religion, you know, think about the kind of core unity of thought at the heart of many of the world's faiths, you know, the kind of deep, kind of metaphysical, moral, spiritual truths and principles which they uphold, which could potentially, you know, be a very interesting contribution to the clarification of some kind of, you know, conception of progress, which takes us beyond what we have now, but that really is genuinely kind of global and universal in that sense.
And do you, I mean, you're a young person, you're in London, you say, and do you get a sense that there is that kind of discussion taking place in London or the UK from where you're sitting? Is there acknowledgement of that development? I only say it because I left London 4 years ago to come and live in Brussels, and I have a particular view, but that's not my role here today. It's to facilitate the conversation.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I mean, my sense is, I guess, you know, universities, international institutions, civil society networks, they're very diverse places.
Exactly.
And so, especially within, you know, there will be certain pockets within conversations. I think this was mentioned earlier, you know, that for some people it's just obvious that religion is here to stay. It's not going to go away. It's going to be as big a feature of the 21st century as the, you know, as preceding centuries. And then in other spaces, somehow this point still has to be made. It still has to sort of clarify unity of thought around that kind of question. So I imagine it's the same. It's pretty similar with, you know, with discussions of the role of religion in social progress.
Sure.
So
I suppose it's a sense of how can religion become that social glue where people of your generation and even younger are able to very easily think of a norm that actually someone's going to wear a hijab, they're going to go and do the prayer, they're going to celebrate on a Friday, they're going to go to Mass on a Sunday, and it becomes not something which is an oddity, which is a ritual, but something which doesn't separate, but actually thinks about it in a more unique sense of unity, that this is just about how you live your life, that doesn't make you different, to a certain extent, is what you were saying. Thank you for your contribution, really very, very much appreciated. I'm now going to go to Manuela.
Hello, yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Hello. So say who you are, where are you? Please introduce yourself and tell us where you are.
Yeah, of course. My name is Manuela Carpenedo. I'm a Brazilian social scientist. I'm the case that Grace was mentioning, you know, people from the South coming to the West, studying and working. I work at Kent University. And thank you so much, Nancy and Grace, for putting religion into the map of social progress. I think this is really much needed. And my question would go more in line in how you in this project could see these religious narratives from the global South. And here I'm specifically interested in these narratives, these religious ideas from Latin America as well as Africa, how they are informing, how they can inform this new framework on social progress. Any example, any ideas, and how this is being explored or articulated in a more global arena. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Manuela. I'm going to bring our contributors back here because I'm really enjoying the fact that we've quite got a lot of you, engaged with questions. So it's great. I will bring back some. I'm hoping that both Grace and Nancy are taking notes of the key questions that you're raising. I now want to go to Maryam. Maryam, are you there? Hello. You're on mute. Speak now.
Hello.
Hello. Say who you are and where are you based?
I'm Maryam, and I'm currently we're currently living in Brussels. So thank you for all the comments. And I had well, I wanted to think just to say that in Grace's example on the availability of clean water, it seems that perhaps there's an underlying assumption that spiritual and material progress are inextricably intertwined. For example, bringing clean water to everyone also needs justice, trust, generosity, and fairness to be in play. And my question was just, what do you all think about this?
Really well, very well said, because that's exactly thought-provoking, because it's that thing about social progress, this debate, is it's deeply philosophical, and we should be challenging ourselves. And you're right, because if you're going to get that, there's all the list of issues, and you said would have to be in place if you're going to get the water across the world. So thank you for joining us. That's much appreciated. I now have Ilya.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, welcome. Say who you are, where are you based?
So my name is Ilya Novikov, and I'm based in Geneva, Switzerland. And I'm a human rights lawyer. So the few words that Mr. Petrossian and others just had about human rights echo a lot with me. And so I have a comment, an answer, or a tentative answer to the question that Max just put, and a question. I'm going to try to be short. So to me, it is abundantly clear, as Grace put it, that human rights have an important role to play in religion. The other way around, that religious communities and religious feeling as an inspiration to individuals and communities and movements has a vital role for human rights. I mean, the Universal Declaration was co-written by a commission which was full of people who were renowned for the religious fervor, be it Eleanor Roosevelt or many others. And there's many initiatives going on now, like Faith for Rights. And what we see today, I mean, there's a real feeling in Geneva, it's very strong, that for the last decade, we've been living through a human rights crisis, so to speak, and it's getting a little worse every year. That's the consensus, unfortunately, and which is why such initiatives as Faith for Rights, which are really taking off right now, are very important. We can talk about the SDGs and social progress and so on, but the truth is we are fighting a losing battle right now, and we need every help we've got. And this is exactly what the Secretary General is saying, what the High Commissioner for Human Rights is saying. We're all in this together. We need to cooperate. And so this is one of the reasons why, okay, I do human rights for a job at the IPU, but at the same time, my vocation is interreligious dialogue, and this is why I'm part of this interfaith platform here in Geneva. And we do several projects, and we enjoy talking together. We just had a talk last week about how this COVID moment, as you said, is an opportunity not to miss. And but there is a lot of talk, and I think this is the answer, I guess, the dialogue, the engagement, the consultation between different religions, getting together and realize that we have a responsibility. We claim we are, examples to be followed, but now this is a great answer, I think, to the problem of today. But talk is not enough. Talk is cheap. We need to walk the talk. And this is, I guess, the question that I want to bring here. Is there any insights, and here I'm particularly thinking about Grace and the IPSP team, are there any insights of how can we get beyond the coming together around a round table and make those declarations and say universal values, responsibility, agency, how do we make the world a better place and really live those those values that we profess. But how do we go beyond that, and how do we actually carry this through to tangible action, working together?
Thank you. Very, very, very thought-provoking again. And there's something about intercultural dialogue and interfaith dialogue. It occurs to me has to be constant and consistent, because actually it becomes the mechanism by which you're able to do things, perhaps. And that if you didn't have that, if you saw it as a means to an end and then suddenly you get a declaration, it ain't going to make a jot of a difference. But actually you need to find a way in which generations are able to have a conversation with each other across culture and across religion. I'm sure we'll pick up on that. But thank you for Ilya for joining us on that point. We have quite a lot of you. We have, and Paula, I can see your hand up, but I will bring you in a second. I promise. You just put Paula down. So we have Daphne.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. My name is Vahedi Amador. I'm from Mexico. And I think it's very interesting, the conversation here. I would like to say that there is a need, there is important that every community has this space to console and to discuss about how to progress in a local level. But listening to all of this conversation, for example, Fred, I think it's our friend from Iran, and also Ben Shewell, they were talking about, Ben was talking about that maybe religion can give us principles that can help the humanity to continue to reach and to walk towards progress. And on the other side, Fred was saying that we need also, even though communities need to find their own ways to follow progress, we need to have these principles which guide us, yeah, in a universal level. So that's when I make the connection of the religion with progress. We need these 4 principles that guide us as a global community, and these principles that will apply in the universal, in the global arena, but also in the local arena, in the local level. And these principles are, as we have heard, and yeah, we have heard, like the importance of understanding that we are a family, we're diverse, but we are all coming from the same origin. And that's a principle that you can find in all of the religions. We come from the same origin, and we are looking for progress to develop a civilization as a whole. And so, like, for example, just answering some of the questions that the participants are making, like here, for example, in Mexico, Latin America, but in all of the world, there are some projects that are trying to bring these principles from religion to the action and to the social arena, to social progress. And like, for example, a Baha'i community, I'm a member of Baha'i community, like here in Mexico. We're trying to do some activities that help us study these religious principles that are in essence the same in all of the religions, and try to apply them in the service of our communities. Like, for example, we're studying about how we need to teach from children stage that we need to be just, we need to be united if we want to make the progress available in the communities. And so we are understanding, we're trying to understand in action how we help and we study and help each other in a community, in a neighborhood. How can we settle these unity principles first, and then we move towards this material progress also, because we have found that when we have this unity and these religious, spiritual principles settled there as a base, it's easier and it's stronger, the community is stronger to start this material and and other kind of economical and social developments. So it's very interesting to be here, but this is something we're trying to do, no? So
That sounds absolutely. Tahlia, thank you, Chris. Thank you for joining us from Mexico as well. That's great. But you know, one of the things that occurs to me as listening to you was that the way in which the politics has so affected how the Mexican community is viewed by itself and by others, especially across the border. You know what I'm talking about, and whether that sense of diaspora into the United States has had some sort of sense of the kind of connection you just talked about, that has the Trump effect changed this dialogue for you?
If Trump has affected our view as a community, as a country, you mean?
Yeah.
I think yeah, there are a lot of people here that thinks that Trump's decision and also our own president's decision are influencing in some way our progress or not progress as countries. But what I see right now is many people, like especially youth, are starting to raise their voice and are starting to talk more and trying to find other youth to have these discourses on how can we help. And of course, there are a lot of I don't know how to call it, manifestations, or I don't know, when you go out to the street, no, and you say we do not agree, and that's happening also here, as in the United States, also here in Mexico.
Okay.
But I think there are a lot of people who are not letting the things in the government a lot as before.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for responding to that last question of mine, which obviously I think those of us, all of us listening to you, because we go to your location, makes us think about that particular issue. So I want to go back to Daphne, because we didn't get a chance to take you, and I know that Paula, you had your hand up too. So Daphne, can you hear me? You need to unmute.
Yes, I'm unmuted now, yes?
Excellent, sorry. Welcome.
No, thank you so much.
You're based here in Brussels?
Yes, I am based here in Brussels. And I wanted to actually, it was interesting to hear Maryam's point, because I wanted to, I was reflecting on, and when she said, I'm going to be echoing her a bit, but when Grace mentioned and said, economic betterment is not enough. And we hear this a lot in public debates, how economic betterment is not enough. We hear this phrase a lot. But for some reason, this time when I heard it, it made me think about what social reality is actually comprised of. If economic betterment is not enough, then this statement for me revealed that seeing society just as a sum of economic interactions between individuals and communities somehow is falling short right now in taking humanity, the collective human family, to where we want to go, to what our vision is. So, and then as it's been described by others so far, it made me reflect that social fabric is also, it consists of other kinds of riches as well. And these riches like justice, humility, and selflessness, they're also promoted by genuine, constructive, and living religion. And they then become building blocks of really resilient communities that are trying to, become protagonists in their development, in their progress. So that, the way I'm going to echo Maryam is that I saw, okay, then when we think of social progress, then we cannot think of material and whatever you call it, spiritual or ethical or social, we cannot really separate them. So this is also something that I wanted to bring up.
Thank you. But this is that's your view, right? Definitely, that you think that there should be this wonderful matrix or connectivity or a fabric that's woven of these various threads that represents social progress.
Yes, and not even should be, I think it is, because our spiritual and ethical development reflects also in our material, like in the case of water, for example. I mean, we have enough riches in the world, we have a lot of resources, but there's no, for example, there are people who are deprived of them. And I think this is just a reflection of this interwoven. We are very materially developed, but we are still falling short in our collective spiritual development. So I think it already is, that tapestry is already there.
Definitely. Thank you so much. That's been really helpful. Now I'm going to go back to Paula because she was being so patient. Paula?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Paula and I'm serving on the Council of Religion in Nuremberg, Germany. Nuremberg considers itself the city of human rights. Okay, this is now in my life, in my profession.
Welcome, by the way, firstly. Thank you for joining. Are you in Nuremberg right now?
Yes, I'm in Nuremberg, yes. I have to share with you from the time when I was professionally involved. I worked in development for many, many years in nutrition and maternal child health. And so many things have been brought up in this discussion about the need to balance the material and the spiritual development of individuals, of communities. I have seen in my work of the last 30 years so much that it was always the human factor that was a hindrance to the success and the sustainability of many efforts that have been made by communities. So the like spiritual, ethical, whatever you want to call it, the refinement of the human character to carry on sustainable social progress, to me, is really the most important. And that should be based on a shared vision. And a vision also evolves. You cannot have a glorious vision from one moment to another. It's all part of mutual learning, of developing towards higher levels, materially and spiritually. I implemented as a project manager in NGOs for the European Union. I worked in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, so former Soviet Union, Sumatra, Afghanistan.
Wow.
So really, when people say it's different culturally, I don't say this anymore because I have been on the ground in so many different cultures, and the universal values is really the most important. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing with us, and also I suppose from your experience, and this is something perhaps for you to think about when we come back into this kind of the closing session and the kind of the glide path down to the end of our debate, is that so we have international declarations, we have agreements. What kind of new thing do we need to have in place in the future, you think, that's going to build on this kind of conversation? Because this is lovely, and this demonstrates the point you've made, because we've got people from all over the world in this conversation saying very similar things. So therefore, how do we find a way, a route, a pathway, a structure, a global conversation, an institutional framework or not, that can really help us not just along the way, but also serve as a conscience to us, lest we not forget the horrors of the past. So think about that. It's a big question, I know, but I'm also going to ask the organizers to think about that too. So thank you for sharing that with us, Paula. I'm going to now go to Mahar.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, if I pronounced your name right.
Mahar, yeah, close enough.
Welcome. Where are you?
I'm in Berlin, Germany. I work at the Federal Agency for Civic Education here. And my field is the role of religion in post-secular societies, with a large focus on German society. And some of the things that were said really resonated, specifically also this thought that was mentioned before, that we're in many ways, when we're talking about these things, we seem to be talking about a specific conception of reality and the human being also, that assumes that the human being and reality is not just its material self and not just its material body. And then that raises the question, so how do we explore this, and what role? And I think Nancy was saying that before, that that in that exploration, religious communities and people of faith can really help us understand this at much deeper levels, because they open spaces or already have spaces that raise certain questions. And one question I have in the context of that, and that is really somehow on my mind a lot, is how maybe also religion or religious communities, people of faith, can help us move beyond a conception of religion that just presents itself as a personal choice. So either I believe and that's nice for my own well-being, or I don't believe, but then I also don't have to. But if we're, and at the same time, not saying that now everyone has to believe and be a religious person, but at the same time, if we're talking about an understanding of reality, then it seems that maybe religion as a system of knowledge and practice can maybe help us explore that deeper. And I just find it highly interesting and also challenging, though, in the context of also a secular frame, to explore.
Absolutely, yeah.
More
You explode the whole concept of religion as being what we've all been talking about, but actually something that, it is a source of intellectual curiosity. Until you've tested it or we've thought about it, you might be missing out, for example, just by the choices of either I'm not religious or I am religious. So there's something about a new aesthetic around religion. But thank you for joining us. I'm going to final set of questions, I think, with Alessandro.
Yes, thank you so much for today's this afternoon conversation.
Tell us who you are, Alessandro.
My name is Alessandro. I work with the Office of Public Affairs of the Baha'i community in Italy. I'm based in Rome, and we had a chance in the last few weeks to facilitate a few conversations similar to this one about social cohesion in our country and how this idea has changed in the time of this crisis that we've faced. And one idea that has been coming again and again is the idea that perhaps also in terms of social progress, we might be stuck in the idea of ticking boxes. So we say, we have this, we have that, we have that. So then we have social progress, and versus maybe and also this idea that has emerged of the capacity to react to challenges. One example of it is we've seen that children have been isolated in home here in Italy, as well as many countries in Italy, and had to receive education from home. And the idea of home and that environment as the learning environment is not quite the same for everybody. So everybody has had different challenges. And so the way different communities have reacting also in supporting children has been to give a hand, neighbors to neighbors or the family, where also maybe perhaps we were waiting for we've been stuck in this idea that somehow maybe institutions were gonna come and provide all the answers. And so it just seems to me that what we're also saying is that perhaps this idea of capacity building, of being able to handle challenges, is questioning also as Europeans, is questioning our idea: are we socially progressed, or have we achieved it really? Because then we are noticing that when we are out of the trace path, somehow different new challenges come in. Then it's really hard to respond, and then we realize, okay, maybe we've not progressed so much as a society, because now all of a sudden a small change might put a different question into the.
Indeed, I think you make such an interesting point, Alessandro, in the sense that isn't it remarkable that the crisis has enabled you to know your neighbour in a way that you never knew them before, to know your street and people on the street, the people, the freeness in which people smiled at each other, or when they did the 8 o'clock thing. That sense of connection was remarkable. But it's about how do you sustain that over time and not forget that very important moment in our shared history? Because if we build on that really well, this debate could take us somewhere else potentially. So thank you very much for that. I'm sorry not to bring you in again, because I have to move on, because I've already overspent my time. I have one. Do I have one last? We have Aziza, because you've been very, very patient. Aziza, are you there? I can see you. Hello. Hi. Welcome.
Hi.
Just introduce yourself and tell us where you are.
Yeah, my name is Azizat. I'm from Ilorin, Nigeria. And thank you very much, Nancy.
Are you there
and
at the
Grace.
moment? Is that where you are right now?
Ilorin in Nigeria. Yeah.
Great.
So thank you very much. Yeah, interesting conversation so far. And I'm particularly very thankful to Nancy and Grace, because I'm a scholar of religion myself. I am a lecturer at the Islamic Law Department in the University of Ilorin here. And I find very interesting the discussion of religion in relation to social progress. Because now if we understand social progress to require values such as justice, equity, equality of creation, responsible use of natural resources in a very sustainable way, religion certainly provides a very useful basis for wider articulation of those values in a way that many people could relate with. But again, as a scholar of religion, and I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question, please, whichever way, I think one very thing about religion is also its easy susceptibility to instrumentalization. And I'm from a context where religion has been instrumentalized a lot for political purposes, for gender inequality, to sideline a set of the society. So again, to the extent that those values will be enacted by people, you're going to have bad enactments and good enactments. So the point then is to then expand the discourse, which again is also very, very problematic, because the sense of an intellectual discourse then gives the sense that it's only for scholars or people that are expert in the area, which is just a small segment of the people, as opposed to practice, which again, it's a wider sense. So how do you then get many people to participate so that religion is not then just being used as a way to foster the self-interest of just a segment of the society? So thank you. I just thought I would just
Aziza, thank you. Very, very good question. Obviously pertinent in very many parts of the world. And so it's an extremely important one where we take this from something that's up there, but understand the reality of its impact on people's daily lives. So thank you for making that contribution. I'm now going to, because my colleagues are going to be obviously really mad at me because there was a structure we had in place and I've completely tore that apart, because I was really keen to hear from all of you. So I'm really pleased that we've got all your voices from all over the place. So I'm going to ask you both Nancy and Grace, if you could forgive me and ask you that you come towards the end of this session now and be able to respond to some of the major issues that have been developed by our audience here. And so in the last 15 minutes, I'll bring you back in, but I would like to now go to Samia at Dhaka University, if I may, about the role of development and religious actors. Please, over to you, Samia.
Thank you. That was a very, very interesting conversation.
Wasn't it? Are you in Dhaka at the moment?
I am, that's right.
Lovely.
And I'm at a place called Brack University, not Dhaka University, which is...
sorry.
Yeah, that's fine, that's all right. So just thank you for having me to the Baha'i Society, to IPSP, to the LSE Faith Center. It's been an interesting conversation. As Nancy and Grace have already said, I was a part of the IPSP chapter on religion, and it's been a few years. It was really a very, very wonderful experience. And it's nice to be back to discuss some of the issues that we've highlighted in the chapter, and to really think in terms of, the current moment and whether, some of our conclusions and our suggestions and our analysis still hold. And just to hear from all of you from, I was going to say from Europe, but it seems like from various parts of the world. So that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. So I wanted to talk about religious actors and development and the question of social progress. So I just wanted to flag that I actually work on I work in collaboration with the World Faiths Development Dialogue out of Georgetown University, where we look at the question of religion in development. And that question for me, as well as the WFDD in the US, stems largely from looking at how development plays out in the very minimal sense of socioeconomic development, and then to ask the question of what does religion have to do with it? And oftentimes we find in certain parts of the developing world that religion and development don't really sit well alongside one another. And in that, there's of course, and oftentimes there's a secular bias in how you approach this, because you think, well, religion just hasn't progressed, right? And therefore progress or development really falls within the secular worldview, which is for a lot of the developing world and the agendas that are sort of priorities in the developing world. Development is very materially driven, right? Because we've had this conversation earlier today as well, that, the question of clean water, I mean, it's a basic need, right? And so as a lot of these countries, such as in South Asia and Southeast Asia, in Africa, as they sort of, get on the pathway to development, it's reducing birth rates. It's making clean water accessible. It's reducing child mortality. It's reducing, it's increasing prenatal care. It's very fundamental questions. And of course, this has very much been dictated by a secular agenda. I mean, just to give you an example of my context where I work out of Bangladesh, it's the classic, it's a poster child for actually third world development.
That's right.
Got lots of very, we've got lots of interesting examples of, Grameen Bank, the birth of microfinance. BRAC is the largest NGO in the world, that have really helped in taking very large amounts of the population out of poverty. But however, what we see is, again, a point that's been raised already, that, is development or is social progress, is progress only, economic development? Because we've seen in Bangladesh as well, through the work of microfinance, through the work of the ready-made garment industry. I mean, that's sort of a neoliberal kind of developmental trajectory. We're the second largest producer of ready-made garments to the world after China. And in particular peril during the COVID crisis, some of you may be aware. What we've seen is, as populations have actually come out of development, and in Bangladesh, we're threatening to become middle income in a couple of years. We've seen that actually progress, I mean, what this elusive idea of what progress is and have we achieved it really falls by the wayside if you follow very narrowly an economically determined definition of progress, right? So we've seen that, and then you've got alongside the question of religion and religious leaders who have, again, the young lady from Nigeria just told us that, there's this in the developing world, there's real instrumentalization and political mobilization of religion that happens. And oftentimes what happens is religion becomes the purview of those who believe in identity politics, right? And development or progress becomes something that's very, enlightenment driven, materially determined, and of course has a very strong relationship with capitalism, which most of the world has really embraced now. And so the world of religion and the world of development, they find it very difficult. There's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of competition, and they find it difficult to come to the same page on the common good and what's good for our communities. So part of my work has actually been to engage religious leaders on the question of development and bring religious leaders and secular development practitioners, because what we find in a lot of the developing world is, of course, this instrumentalization and political religious actors, but also we find religion being a very, very important part of community life. And the mosque imams and religious communities actually doing things during Ramadan to help each other, to come to care for the dying, to care for the ill. There are hospitals that are run by religious organizations, so they actually are an important part of development. And what's in that? What's the story? And how can the two sides actually learn from each other? So I've been engaged in this work for several years, and we can open the floor up to conversation later where I could take more targeted questions. But I just wanted to say that a couple of issues, of course, there's religion playing a positive role, and there's of course secular development playing a positive role, and both playing not such positive roles. So how do you actually allow this conversation to happen? Right? How do you mediate this conversation? And of course, what's very important about our IPSP work is the idea that religion is not an immutable phenomenon, and for religious leaders to understand that, right, to engage with that, and also for everybody engaged in the business of social progress or facilitating social progress to understand that social progress is also not finite. Right? So as we go through different stages of development, what it means, what social flourishing means, what the flourishing of the community means is actually very important. And both, the materialistically determined discourse and approaches, as well as the more spiritual, religious, community, good kind of engagement, need to come in conversation with one another to keep that discourse alive and moving, right? And so neither one is actually finite, neither one has the last say. And oftentimes it's difficult to do that because everybody's very entrenched in what they believe.
Indeed.
And of course, if you give religious leaders too much voice, there's always this kind of apprehension that this is going to lead, especially for traditional societies, for the developing world, where religion and politics also have a problematic relationship or a contentious relation or a competitive relationship, to say, well, this is going to lead to a religious theocracy, right? And there's always a pushback. Right. So what happens is some of the genuine resources from religion, from the religious worldview, from the experiences and aspirations of religious communities actually don't make it to the platform. And if they do, oftentimes my experiences, the language is limited, everybody is sort of left thinking about, or asking the what if question, all right, we have hope, we have love, so what, And so this is a conversation that really needs to be channelized, and that there has to be a lot of hand holding and diplomacy that
Sure.
goes
Samia,
into
if I can cut into, because I've got to manage the time a little bit better in the last 15, 20 minutes that I've got. I think I'm intensely, I think a lot of people are interested. You said you bring, development practitioners, so development on one side, and then the religious practitioners. And you said you kind of try and have that dialogue. Just share with us what's that like? Because I imagine it's all men, because there aren't that many women in that space. Especially,
I try to get some women too.
I'm sure you do. Sure you do. But I know the content. You know the content better than I do.
It's tough. It's tough. It's mostly men. And I often try to have a conversation on gender equality, so you can see the limits of that, right? And we do. I mean, as we do this work, we also engage in research. We actually also engage in keeping in touch with the communities. So we, for example, on the gender question, we go to the second tier. We go to the imams' wives. right? As although they don't have official status as religious leaders, we go to imams' wives, and that keeps the imams happy, and it gives them a certain voice, and hopefully you hope to start from somewhere and go to the next level.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But it has to be a really non-antagonistic approach, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. In terms of what you, and I'm going to bring in James in a moment. Do you see any signs of hope in the fact that there's some change happening in development aid? Like when you think about what's happening in Europe or elsewhere, I mean, you know, the United States development model, they, you know, from, I'm going by, and this is pre-Trump moment, it was really quite Renaissance. It was really modern in terms of what they were doing in all parts of the world. I'm not sure that's being continued, but in Europe, they're thinking through the relationship with Africa at the moment in terms of, you know, what kind of different approaches we should be thinking through that brings not, I hope, which is imbued by this kind of economics plus, or a wrapper of values and social progress contained within it, not to make a dilemma of, you know, one and the other. Do you have hope?
I do have hope. I think you know, some of the questions that came up for Europe, you know, the question of very individuated faith, spiritual faith, I don't think we're there yet. It's still very community based, right? But I mean, like I said, you have to start somewhere, and you have to work with the premise that social progress is also not finite.
Sure.
Right.
Indeed.
So yeah, I do think there's hope, and I see some good examples around.
Oh,
I see some good examples of interfaith, not just dialogue, but action. Somebody had brought that up as well, where, you know, religious leaders from different groups have come, you know, to think about climate action, to think about climate change and difficult and interesting and important development questions like that. Of course, gender and sexuality remains a vexed issue, you know, and to really think about this, you know, hopefully for the developing world, I think will take continued work and effort. But, you know, as long as some people continue to do the work, why shouldn't there be hope?
And have the dialogue. Simon, thank you very much for that very, very interesting, thought-provoking contribution. And you make some really important points about you know, how development denies so much. It's so focused on a particular ideology, in fact, at the heart of it. So now, James, where are you? I'm going to ask James. Thank you very much. James,
hi.
You're from the NSC, Director of NSC at the Faith Centre. Talk to us about, you know, interfaith initiatives that go beyond peaceful coexistence. Over to you.
Well, I think it's useful to focus on interfaith relations at this point in the conversation, because a lot of the contributions to the discussion have presupposed some degree of interfaith cooperation, even perhaps some kind of theological spiritual convergence in a model of social progress. But other contributors also raised, and we've just heard from Samir as well, some of the obstacles to that, the ways in which religion's being instrumentalized in different ways in different parts of the world, and from our human rights lawyer friend, the difficulties in building kind of universal principle and consensus across faith communities. And I was asked to say something about how the pandemic is affecting these issues. And I think it's been very interesting, because what it's done is intensify some of these challenges that we've seen for a long time in the interfaith movement and in interfaith initiatives. It's not all negative. I think where we have existing established interfaith networks and relationships, they've been fantastically mobilized at a community level. We've seen here in Bradford in the UK, Christians and Muslims working together to support people isolated in their homes during the pandemic. And at a national level, discussions with faith communities about the regulation of places of worship and so forth have been able to use existing networks. But it's also intensified some of the challenges. The first, I would say, has been an aggravation of some of the sectarian tendencies that we've seen and alluded to earlier in the conversation. Hostility to secular government. We've seen the most extraordinary encroachment of secular government, probably necessary, certainly necessary in my view, but unprecedented. And a lot of religious communities have reacted defensively and negatively towards that. Some with a disregard for scientific approaches to this pandemic, viewing it perhaps more as a demonic phenomenon or the judgment of God, which their community, their faith tradition is their source of protection. Then related to that difficulty has been an acceleration of the what we call the migration online, the fact that because people can't worship within their faith communities, within their localities, there's a lot more religious expression online, a lot of it very positive and constructive. But it has accelerated this disconnection from local community. Now that's got challenges for interfaith relations, not least because it tends to be the network of local places of worship and the infrastructure of religious communities that is the structure of interfaith dialogue, and that's now becoming much more fluid. So trying to create interfaith networks is now more challenging. And it's also exposing people to perhaps more sectarian, more extreme religious views. And the Metropolitan Police here in London have voiced concern about potential for increased radicalization during the lockdown, people engaging more online. And then finally, I think it's raised the question that's been present in the interfaith world for a long time of have we got the right people at the table? The conversation that we've had here in the UK with faith leaders about the reopening of places of worship. For some communities, it's worked very well, but the government has used the existing interfaith contacts that they have. And in some cases, it's become clear that those people actually aren't as representative as perhaps we thought that they were, and that their legitimacy within the wider religious community simply isn't present. And so this question that you raised about going beyond peaceful coexistence, I mean, my initial reaction was, I'll take peaceful coexistence. That sounds very attractive to me. But I wonder if actually what we're talking about is the way in which the interfaith world has kind of created a sort of constructed a bit of a false peaceful coexistence, and going forward, perhaps we can have an interfaith dialogue that's more difficult, engaging with some of these harder to reach communities, but that is ultimately going to be a lot more effective in achieving the various areas of social progress that we've been talking about.
James, you might have just given us a little good idea that we might be able to take forward, because I think you're absolutely right in terms of the points you made. What I'm so saddened by and disappointed by is that the point you make about how the government's worked with the interfaith leaders. Many moons ago, I was director of the Commission for Racial Equality in the UK, and I remember working with the government then and being at odds that actually this is no criticism of them, but these are gentlemen who have no connection to the reality on the ground or many of the communities. And it saddens me that dynamic, and I think it's racial as well as ethnic in terms of how people adopt an approach to certain communities, that they haven't changed that mindset, that actually they need to go beyond the so-called community leader, but actually put elbow grease in community development. Because when you think about what we've done today, it's not too hard to do. And look at us, we've got voices from all over the world to have this kind of conversation. It's not difficult when you just have the will and the effort and the commitment. James, thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to concluding this session. So I know that Grace and Amy, are you still there? Are you still speaking to me? Are you going to smile at me? Because I've literally totally torn up the agenda of our time together, but we're now moving towards conclusion. And so I would like you both to, if you can, spend a couple, 2 or 3 minutes each, 4 minutes each, just responding to some of the things you've heard. Then I can bring in Rachel and wrap up our really very interesting conversation, for which we're very thankful to you for. So Grace, over to you.
I'm going to go first, and I'm going to do this by kind of returning us to base, which is to the report, and reminding people that we tackled our question in terms of 5 themes: gender and sexuality, diversity and democracy, conflict and peacemaking, welfare, well-being and healthcare, and care for the earth, which is about creation If you want to access all that, and I've seen one or two of the comments on the chat, go to the links at the end of the concept note that you got with your invitation. Go into the LSE blog, courtesy of James. Thank you for letting us do that. And you'll click your way into any or all of those things. And many of the questions you raised, you will find in that material. Now, I'm not going to do an example of everything, but I'm going to stick to the climate change one, which has come around several times, and the place of religious groups in this. I'm going to do a big example and a little outworking of it. Now, the big example is the papal encyclical Laudato Si. Remember, in this encyclical, there is a key theme. The scientific issue becomes a moral one, because if we do nothing, it will be the poor that suffer. Bring together climate science and social justice. The scientists recognize that your dissemination is enormously enhanced if you bring in the religious networks and the Catholic Church. And note that this encyclical is positively welcomed by the scientific community. Read the leader in Nature in June 2015, entitled Hope from the Pope, and you will see an extraordinary welcome for the Pope's views by the premier journal of international science.
Yes.
Now, a little example. This is an English doctoral thesis done in Southampton in the Department of Oceanography. It combines climate science, social science, and religious networks. I can give you the link to that in due course. You have physical data coming from the oceanography bit, all sorts of satellite images and aerial photographs. But then you have interviews and participatory workshops with local people in order to understand how local people in Melanesia, in the Solomon Islands, perceive what is happening to their islands, which are currently going underwater. It's immediate, absolutely immediate. So you have these satellite images and you have the people who are experiencing that on the ground. But finally, you have the establishment of an environment observatory within the Anglican Church in Melanesia, which is by far the largest network in that country, much more extant than any political organization or economic activity. And it's this that is empowering local people to create their own scientific evidence of climate change and shoreline erosion. They, not the Western scientist, will tell you when the well became saline. So pay attention to the local voices, but within the thinking of the global encyclical, and you're getting towards some of the ideas that we were trying to portray in the IPSB chapter, which very, very much emphasized creative partnerships. It's been a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you.
Grace, thank you very much. Very excellent and poignant and apt examples. And it brings alive the theory, if you like, of what some of you have been writing about and saying. Amy, can I turn to you before I bring in Rachel for some concluding remarks?
I think you mean Nancy, not Amy.
Nancy, I am do apologize. I'm terrible.
So I want to reiterate the two themes that Grace has just emphasized. One is that progress is dependent on what we call strategic partnerships. That is that the key players, whether they're secular or religious, have to be around the table. And that presumes another key finding and key position that we took, which is that as much as we may have these grand global goals about progress, they're going to take shape in very local, particular contexts. What I want to add is to just challenge people to expand their understanding of what they mean when they say religion. On the one hand, we mean ideas. We've talked a lot about that this afternoon. And one of the ones, well, two that I want to hold up. One is that the notion of hope, of a notion that there is something better that we can hope for, that is really at the heart of religious systems. And paired with that is the notion that every religion has some notion of wanting people to be healthy and live a long life. So we can start with some very broad kinds of understandings of possible places where there are ideas that may be embedded in religious communities that can be part of a conversation with the broad range of people who need to be involved in pursuing any particular kind of social progress. I think one of the things we haven't talked a lot about this afternoon is the way religious communities provide ways to enact rituals that are important at embodying these key moments in people's lives. I think one of the things COVID has really brought home to us is the degree to which we have a kind of human horror of dying alone and not being able to be memorialized.
Indeed.
And that has reminded us that health is a holistic concept. It's something that's not just about the body getting well. But the other thing that we've come back to a number of times this afternoon is the important role of religious leaders and of being smart about who those religious leaders are, bringing them into a conversation that's a really respectful conversation so that we're not talking about just instrumentalizing, getting the religious leader to deliver our message, thank you very much. So being able to see the degree to which in any given community, religious leaders may or may not be important partners and need to be brought into that conversation. But the other thing we've made very clear this afternoon is the degree to which religion is embodied in organizations. It is, these local gatherings of religious people are ubiquitous around the world. And you know, in the United States, there are like 10 times as many local congregations as there are public schools.
Exactly.
So, you know, this is a place where people are already coming together. They are already helping each other. They're already delivering food and taking care of each other's kids. One of the things we saw in the AIDS crisis in Africa, of course, was the way people were taking care of orphans and helping people abide by their medical regimes as they began to get onto the retrovirals. In the Ebola crisis, we saw the way a real partnership between the health experts and the local religious leaders allowed people to come up with ways of thinking about burial that could be safe and spiritually respectful. So this kind of big global goal of progress, of health, and so forth takes these very local particular forms. And it's at that level that getting the right people around the table, having the right kind of respectful conversation, and remembering that religion is something that is in fact mutable. It does change. And as people have these conversations, it's about ideas, it's about practices and rituals, and it's about how the organizations and their leaders work.
Thank you very, very much. And you're able to, bring in those examples of what, from your experience of, how Ebola and other epidemics and others have created that opportunity to think differently and better about a number of facets that you referred to. Now, Rachel, I'd like to invite you in now, if I may, to say a few words to conclude before I say goodbye, because I know it's been great, huh?
Thank you so much. I won't even attempt to conclude this in any way because it's been so rich. There have been so many insights, but I just wanted to bring a few things in here that I also just heard people say in one shape or another. And I'm sure that this can be sort of a conversation that can be continued in a different form. We have to see about that. But really is what I'm hearing is that yes, religion is a key element in social progress, but also not just under any conditions. it sort of needs to fulfill certain criteria. And one of them that just comes to mind, it needs to free itself from these feelings of exclusivity or superiority, if it wants to be that actor in social progress. The other thing that I'm hearing is that it needs to walk hand in hand with science. And I think this is something also that we've seen just in its connection with sort of development and its role there. So then the other thing that I just is this sort of dichotomy or this separation of the world and developed and non-developed isn't particularly meaningful. So we're seeing more and more that really every part of the world is walking on a path of social progress and is coming to understand what social progress entails. In some parts, certain elements are more advanced, in others, other elements are more advanced. So I think we need to sort of get rid of this kind of separation and just see all of us walking on this joint path of learning about what social progress entails. That is one thing. And here also something was mentioned that, again, this dichotomy of religious and secular isn't particularly meaningful either. So how can we move away from sort of this, how do you say that, this categorizing also, and really just tap into what helps humanity to progress and to have this joint conversation about it. I think, and that's what I heard again, people talked about, you know, this dialogue or whatever we want to call it. We need spaces where we can unpack it, we can ask each other selves questions, where we can again learn with and from each other. And these spaces need to include everyone, whatever their views and whatever sort of their background and their place in the world. And so I'm hoping that we can create more and more spaces like this. I was happy to see that already in this space, we had such a diversity of backgrounds and places. So I think this is a start and we just need to continue this. Thank you for having us.
No, thank you. Can I just say that I wasn't sure that we'd fill the 2 hours, colleagues, and I feel as if we could have gone on further, but I don't think I could stand. I would have to have a break. But it's been so much fun. I mean, I, for one, and this is very selfish, I've had a ball, a thinking ball. This is great in terms of the opportunity to just like engage with all of you and the questions and some of the really insightful comments from all over the world. I think is just so rich and makes me think we should do this more often, shouldn't we? We should do this more often because actually, and it goes back to the points we made, that people struggle so much to create this kind of dialogue. But you know, a very famous social philosopher, Margaret Mead, said that, you know, there's nothing that changes the world than a small group of people. And you know, it's absolutely the case. And you know, there's something about this group of people that I hope that we can reconnect with over time. Because if there ever was a time to talk about social progress, it's now. Because the crisis has brought together not only the worst in us, but also the best in us. And I think there's something about how do we bring the energy of the best of us into a different kind of dialogue, but this continual interaction around what does good feel like and does it behave like in terms of each other and humanity. Thank you all so very much for being here. And you know, most of you might have seen those pianos at train stations or elsewhere. I wish we'd create, you know, coffee and questions in conversation type scenarios, but we can have this kind of conversation where we're fully out of lockdown. Thank you all much. Take care. If you're interested in more about Friends of Europe, go to our website and engage with us. If you've got any questions, email us. And I hope that if any of you have an idea for another future Funky Fridays conversation, get in touch. Have a lovely weekend. Take care. Be safe. And mind your distance. Bye-bye.